Today's job is some worn holes on a small wheeled loaded chassis. And then on the other side, just a slight bit of play. Probably had a couple 100 hours still left, but anyway. If you're not too sure where this piece of steel I'm repairing functions, listen up. This is a wheeled loader, and this is the front chassis portion I'm working on. The portion I'm busy stripping is the articulation joint. The front and the back of the chassis are linked by this joint. The wheeled loader is also steered by this joint. Alright, that's out. Let's investigate the wear on the chassis holes. Yes, it's not too bad, but there is wear and the customer wants it repaired. These holes just need new bushings. Let's move on to the other worn hole. This hole is supposed to have a bush that houses a pin for the lift cylinder. Okay, so that explains that. Let's get to work. I started by grinding down the burrs so I had a level surface on both sides of the hole. It's evident that this hole has worn oval. I need to line bore, and I need my boring bar to be positioned center of the hole. That's when I noticed the two holes, one on either side of the chassis, were in line with the worn hole. This makes the setup for the boring machine easy. The boring bar can now fit right through the whole chassis. And because the two holes are perfectly round, I can use my cones to align the boring bar center of the holes. And Bob's your uncle, the boring bar is positioned. I can now mount my bearings to the chassis. So the bearings are mounted, I can now remove the cones. And that's the two bearings mounted and the boring bar positioned center of the worn hole. Next up, I'm welding on the bearing with the bracket that mounts the boring machine. Next, I mounted the boring machine. And that's that for the setup. I can now begin to bore the hole. The goal here is to bore the hole until it is perfectly round. Which leads me to the next question. How am I going to get the hole back to original size? Well, there's two ways of doing it. I can sleeve it, or I can weld the hole up and bore it back to size. Because I have removed so much material to get this hole round, I'm going to sleeve it. If I never had to remove so much material, I would have welded it up. But with the diameter I've bored the hole to, my sleeve will have a thick wall. If you're wondering why I'm only cutting a couple mils deep now, it's because I don't have a chamfering tool, so I'm just doing it this way. That will be filled up with welding when I weld in the sleeves. And that's the boring complete, so I dismounted the machine, removed the boring bar, then I needed to cut off the bearings and grind down the welding. The hole is now ready for the new sleeve. But for now I'm going to move on and repair the worn holes on the articulation joint. So I flipped over the chassis. Just bear with me, I will get back to this hole. I just want to bring you along through the repair, in the exact order I did it. Alright, so these holes aren't worn too bad, but there is wear. Because the holes weren't worn too bad and were not oval, I used the cones to align the boring bar. Just like the process on the other hole. I welded on two bearings to secure the boring bar center of the worn holes. After that, I could remove this cone and add on the third bearing. And that's all the bearings mounted. I just need to remove the second cone. And to complete the setup, I mounted the boring machine. And that's that. I'm all set up and ready to rock. As I mentioned before, I can sleeve or I can weld up and bore back to size. For these two holes, I'm going the welding route. So I'm first taking a light cut. I'm doing this so I have a thicker layer of welding once I've bored the holes back to original size. I've taken the light cuts, so I now need to weld up. Unfortunately, I don't have a line welder, so I need to weld up by hand. Before I began with the welding, I needed to remove one of the bearings for better access to the hole. I always keep two bearings mounted so I never lose my center position with the boring bar. Alright, so I dropped my hood and welded up the holes. First one, complete. Next lady for a shave. And done and dusted. Not my proudest welds, but they will do. Before I begin the boring, I'm just adding some extra support because I was picking up some vibration when I took the light cuts. Okay, that should do the trick. It's time to mount the bearing, then mount the machine and start cutting. The workshop is soon getting a new line boring machine with a line welder. It's going to save me a lot of time on these jobs. So if you're not already following or subscribed, you know what to do if you want to see videos on that. Okay, the first hole is on size. It's time for the second one. And that's the boring complete. I can now dismount the machine, pull out the boring bar, cut off the bearings, then ground the welding. And that's the articulation holes repaired. I didn't video this all, but I made new pins. For the articulation pin, I could still use the old plate, so I removed it and welded it on the new pin. Now let's test the new pin in the repaired holes. I was satisfied with this result, so I'm now going to machine the sleeve for the other hole. And that's the outside diameter cut to size. Then I gave it a nice chamfer for the welding. Then begin the inside with the center drill. Then the biggest drill in the workshop. And lastly the boring bar to machine the inside to size. And that's the sleeve complete. I can now part it off and go fit it. I'm shrink fitting the sleeve in, that's why it's bigger than the hole I bored. So I heated up the hole till it expanded enough for the sleeve to be dropped in. And it's in. I'm now going to weld it while it's still hot for better penetration. The welding on the first side, complete. I now need to ground it level. I'm not grounding all the welding out. If you can recall, I bored out material for welding and I gave the sleeve a chamfer. Okay, it's time to weld the second side. And the hole on the side of the chassis helped me again. I looked through it while welding. I now need to ground this welding level again. And this side is level. But it is not yet complete. As mentioned before, there is a bushing that is supposed to be housed in this hole. There was some grinding stuck on the inner surface of the hole, so I polished that off with some sandpaper and the drill. Okay, it is now time to fit the new bushings. Here's the old ones I removed from this portion of the articulation joint. I'm going to fit the new ones with my workshop made puller, and then I'm going to be fitting the new seals. If you haven't already seen my puller, check out my old videos. It's one of my favorite workshop made tools. It really makes light work. And that's these bushings in. Time to fit the seals. Alright, let's go fit the bushing seals in the other hole. Again, just too easy. Then fit the 2 seals. Now let's see how this pin fits. Yep, I'm satisfied. All that's left is to assemble the articulation joint. In case you didn't notice, I did touch up with some paint. And there you have it. That's the wheeled loaded chassis repair complete. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this repair, you know what to do. Check you in the next one.